Imagine one of the most heavily defended airspaces in Latin America. Radars active, missile batteries intact, crews on standby, and yet nothing fires. No explosions, no interceptors, no resistance. At first glance, it looks like weakness or failure. But look closer, and you see something far more unsettling. What if Venezuela's air defenses didn't stay silent because they couldn't act, but because acting had become impossible? In modern warfare, power no longer lies in pulling the trigger. It lies in deciding whether you are still allowed to. In early 2026, during a U.S. operation of overwhelming informational intensity, Venezuelan defenses were not destroyed. They were paralyzed politically, cognitively, strategically. If this surprises you, stay with me. Because what happened over Venezuela is not an exception. It is a preview, and if you want to understand how wars are now won without being visibly fought, this is where the story truly begins. To see why this silence mattered, we first need to understand what kind of war we are actually living in today. For decades, we were taught to think of war as a contest of strength. More planes, more missiles, more firepower, but that mental model no longer explains what we are seeing. The real question today is not who can strike, but who can decide to strike without losing control of the consequences. Venezuela's silence forces us to confront a deeper reality. Modern conflict is no longer centered on platforms, but on decision systems. Air defenses are not autonomous machines. They are political instruments embedded in chains of authority, legitimacy, and trust. To fire a missile is not a technical act. It is a sovereign declaration, one that locks a state into an escalation spiral it may not survive. When decision authority is uncertain, contested, or informationally saturated, inaction becomes the safest option, not because the system is broken, but because the cost of deciding has become unbearable. This is the terrain of contemporary warfare. Not destruction, but decision denial. To understand how we arrived here, we need to step back into history, doctrine, and the slow evolution of how power is exercised. To grasp this shift, we have to move beyond headlines and into history. War has always been about more than weapons. Sun Tzu understood this long before satellites or cyber tools existed. The highest form of victory, he wrote, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. For much of the 20th century, however, industrial war pushed thinking in the opposite direction. Power became visible, measured in tanks, aircraft, and divisions. Decision-making existed to enable destruction. That began to change at the end of the Cold War. From Kosovo to Iraq to Libya, a pattern emerged. Before armies collapsed, command collapsed. Before air defenses were destroyed, decision coherence eroded. Information dominance, tempo control, and institutional shock preceded kinetic force. What changed was not technology alone, but the location of the decisive point. As Germany once argued, victory depends on controlling what truly matters. In the 21st century, those decisive points are no longer geographic. They are informational, cognitive, and political. Warfare slowly migrated upward, from platforms to systems to decisions themselves. And once decisions become the battlefield, crises no longer look like explosions, but like silence. The first visible rupture came quietly. No shock and awe, no burning runways, just an operation conducted at overwhelming informational speed. As U.S. assets moved, Venezuela's systems could see but not resolve. Signals accumulated, tracks multiplied, authorizations stalled. This was not confusion, it was overload. Every action now carried existential weight. Engage, and you trigger an escalation you cannot control. Hold fire, and you preserve sovereignty, at least on paper. This is where modern crisis truly lives. Not at the moment of impact, but at the moment of authorization. Under extreme asymmetry, initiative flips into liability. A single missile launch is no longer a tactical response. It is a political point of no return, and when command chains are saturated electromagnetically, cognitively, institutionally, silence becomes strategy. If you're wondering why no one gave the order, that question misses the point. The system was engineered so that no order could safely exist. To understand that, we need to expose the mechanisms operating beneath the surface. Beneath the silence lies a mechanism most people never see. Air defense is not a weapon. It is a system of trust. Sensors detect, command validates. Political authority authorizes. Only then does a missile leave the rail, break any link, and the entire structure freezes. On paper, Venezuela possessed capable systems, long-range interceptors, layered coverage, modern radars. But these platforms were built for a different era, one where authority was clear, legitimacy uncontested, and decisions flowed vertically. In this operation, nothing was destroyed. Instead, the environment was shaped. Information flooded the system faster than it could be resolved. Electromagnetic pressure blurred certainty without creating blindness. Human intelligence exploited fractures of loyalty and fear at the top. This was not decapitation, it was strangulation. The command structure remained intact, yet every decision became politically uncovered, personally risky, strategically irreversible. When authority itself becomes the vulnerability, firepower turns into a liability. And when this pressure continues, paralysis does not remain static, it escalates. The second crisis was sharper, faster, more dangerous. By this point, the system was no longer hesitating, it was locked. Detection still worked, tracking still worked, but time itself became the enemy. As tempo accelerated, the decision window collapsed. Authorized too late, and the moment is gone. Authorized too early, and you own consequences you cannot reverse. This is where decision-centric warfare shows its teeth. The adversary does not need to disable your systems. It only needs to desynchronize them, to compress time, multiply signals, and force choices under maximum ambiguity. In that environment, escalation thresholds dissolve. Every option looks catastrophic. Every delay looks prudent. So the system defaults to stasis. Not because commanders lack courage, but because courage cannot compensate for a broken decision environment. At this stage, air defense ceases to be a military tool. It becomes a strategic artifact, present, visible, and unusable. And while this paralysis unfolds at the top, its consequences flow downward to the people living beneath that silent sky. Now let me bring this closer to you, because decision paralysis is not abstract. It doesn't stay in command centers or briefing rooms. When a state cannot decide, you feel it. You live under systems that exist but don't protect. Under authority that speaks but hesitates. Under sovereignty that is visible yet hollow. For the citizen, silence is not safety. It is uncertainty without explanation. You don't hear missiles, but you feel instability. Rumors move faster than facts. Trust drains downward. And here is the quiet truth. When leaders cannot decide, they outsource risk to you. This is how modern pressure works. Not through fear alone, but through ambiguity. A constant sense that escalation is possible but unpredictable. If this resonates, pause for a moment. Because understanding this is no longer academic. It is the difference between being governed by force and being governed by indecision. If you want to keep seeing analyses that explain power where it actually operates today, stay with this channel. Because this paralysis does not stop at borders, it radiates outward. What happened over Venezuela did not stay over Venezuela. In a connected world, decision paralysis is contagious. When one state's command authority freezes, others recalibrate, allies hesitate, rivals probe, non-aligned actors reassess the cost of resistance. This is how local silence becomes global signal. For major powers, the message is unmistakable. The decisive arena is no longer airspace, but decision space. Control that layer, and geography follows. This logic reshapes deterrence, not by threatening destruction, but by threatening irrelevance. If your systems can see, track, and still not act, your sovereignty becomes conditional. In geopolitical terms, influence shifts without occupation. Power lines are redrawn invisibly through intelligence, information, and tempo. And once that precedent is set, it travels. Every capital watches. Every general recalculates. Which leads to the unavoidable question: if this is the present, what does the future of war actually look like? The future now unfolds along three paths. The first is stability through adaptation. States restructure around decision resilience. They decentralize authority, harden trust, and design systems that can decide under pressure. The second is managed decline. Systems remain intact but rigid. They function in peacetime, hesitate in crisis, and freeze under asymmetry. The third is collapse by paralysis, where legitimacy erodes. Command fragment. Fear replaces authority. Here, weapons still exist, but they no longer matter. Decisions never form. This is the quiet danger of the coming era. War no longer announces itself with mobilization or fire. It arrives as decision exhaustion. Technology does not remove human choice. It encircles it with speed, prediction, and narrative pressure until choosing becomes irrational. Which brings us to the final question. If power now lies in controlling decisions, what does real strength actually mean? What Venezuela revealed is not a failure of defense, but a revelation of power. In the 21st century, strength is no longer measured by what you can destroy. It is measured by what you can prevent from being decided. The most advanced form of dominance is invisible. No craters, no wreckage, just a strategic environment where every adversary option becomes irrational before it is chosen. This is decision superiority. Those who control the informational layer, who shape perception, tempo, legitimacy, and risk, do not need to fight often. They decide when fighting stops making sense. War is no longer about crossing borders. It is about crossing decision thresholds. If you take one insight from this analysis, let it be this: the future will not belong to the strongest armies, but to the systems that make resistance cognitively, politically, and strategically impossible. If this changed how you see power, warfare, or sovereignty, share it. Because the most important battles ahead will not be visible, and understanding them early is a form of strength.